Kansas. When you hear that name, what do you think of? Tornadoes? Wheat? The Wizard of Oz? One of the 7 gateways to hell? Stick around to learn more about Kansas haunted locations, including the Sallie House, Fort Leavenworth, and Stull. Beaumont, Kansas is near the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve and the home of the oldest water tower in the United States. The Beaumont Inn was constructed in 1879 as a stagecoach stop. Most of the customers were cattle buyers. Once aviation came to the area, an airstrip was created in the prairie, and the inn was a common stop when passengers needed a break from the flight. S.J. Craig Enterprises has restored the hotel. For a long time, the hotel was used as a sporting house. One of the working women was married but fell in love with Zeke, one of her regulars. Her husband found out and murdered the man. A cowboy figure can be seen at the top of the stairs, and chairs will be moved behind doors. It is said to be that of Zeke. Another common encounter is the clock radios in the hotel will all go off at the same time, between 2 and 3 a.m. Also, the sounds of spurs jangling and loud bangs can be heard. Kansas City. And yes, there are 2. One on the Missouri side and one on the Kansas side. This story takes place in Kansas. German-born Anton Sauer came to New York City in 1853, where he established a tannery business and met his wife, Francesca. Due to declining health from tuberculosis and the death of his wife, Anton moved to Kansas City in 1867. By 1871, he decided to build a home that reflected his success as a wholesale grocer. This house overlooks the Kansas River on a 63-acre tract of land. The Sauer Castle, as it later became known, included gardens, a greenhouse, vineyard, wine cellar, and a smokehouse. Anton died in 1879 of tuberculosis, leaving behind his second wife, Mary, and their children. Mary lived in the castle until 1921, when she passed away. The castle was purchased in 2023 and is currently being restored to its historical grandeur. Neighbors of the Sauer Castle claim to have seen floating lights near the tower. They hear voices coming from the home when no one is there. A woman in black paces the widow's walk, and a man and woman have been seen dancing in the tower on Halloween. Known as the Queen of Kansas Cowtowns and home to the 34th President Dwight D. Eisenhower, Abilene was settled in 1858 by Timothy and Eliza Hershey. The settlement consisted of 2 log houses, a stable, and a corral, and was advertised as the last square meal east of Denver. By 1871, Abilene was a booming cow town, and in April, Wild Bill Hickok was appointed city marshal. Although he was not the best sheriff due to his gambling, drinking, and time with the ladies of the night at the sporting houses, he still succeeded in keeping guns out of the city. Unfortunately, he was released from sheriff duties because the cattle drives were no longer coming through town due to the increased use of railroads. Today, a replica of the cattle capital is not far from the original town site. One can visit the site to see gunfights and take stagecoach rides. Visitors to Old Abilene Town report being touched, experience cold spots, and seeing apparitions of people dressed in period clothing from the 1800s is also common. Various places throughout Old Abilene Town are said to have disembodied voices as well. Lawrence, Kansas has a rich history from the Civil War. It was home to the Free State Hotel, named to make it clear to the settlers that Kansas should be a free state in the Union. After a pro-slavery group attacked and destroyed the hotel in 1856, Colonel Schuyler Eldridge rebuilt the hotel in 1857. It was damaged again in 1863 by Confederate forces and William Clark Quantrell, along with Bloody Bill Anderson and Jesse and Frank James. After the destruction of Lawrence by Quantrell, Colonel Eldridge vowed to rebuild the city. The rebuilt hotel opened in 1865 under the Hotel Eldridge, using the original cornerstone from the Free State Hotel. In 1932, Clyde Barrow of the Bonnie and Clyde gang checked into the hotel and watched over the First National Bank at the corner of 8th and Massachusetts. Clyde and his two accomplices robbed the bank of nearly $33,000. Over the decades, various business leaders in Lawrence would intervene and restore the hotel to its former splendor. Today, the hotel contains rooms, suites, a restaurant, and meeting event spaces. Room 506 is said to be the portal to the spirit world and Colonel Eldridge's favorite spot. Guests can find breath marks on clean mirrors, doors opening and shutting independently, and lights turning on and off. Other areas experience cold spots, apparitions of people in period clothing, even soldiers. And there is an elevator ghost who likes to open and close the elevator doors on the 5th floor. Photographers have even mentioned technical difficulties with their camera equipment while in the elevator. My personal favorite, and also have some personal ties, this location is located between Emporia and Neosho Rapids. The Rocky Ford Bridge, also known as Bird Bridge, spans the Cottonwood River and has been on the National Register of Historic Places since 2020. It was built in the 1890s in Kansas City at the Stockyards and was moved to its current location in 1907. The bridge became famous in July of 1983 when hikers found the body of a mathematics instructor at Emporia State University, the body of Sandra Bird. She was found face down in the water outside of her car. Although at first her death appeared to be a car accident, evidence showed she sustained injuries on the bridge and was thrown over when unconscious. Her husband, Reverend Tom Bird, was convicted of beating Sandra, driving her car off the bridge, and then throwing her off. Though some locals still have doubts if Bird killed his wife. Could it have been his mistress, Lorna Anderson, or even a contract killer? Sandra's death received national attention from papers like the Los Angeles Times, and a made-for-TV movie was produced in 1987, Murder Ordained. Murder Ordained featured some pretty famous names. You might know them. Keith Carradine, Jo Beth Williams, Kathy Bates, and John Goodman. Both Tom Bird and his mistress Lorna Anderson were convicted of killing their spouses. He was convicted of criminal solicitation of Lorna's husband Martin, with 2 to 7.5 years in prison, and first-degree murder of Sandra. He was sentenced 15 years to life. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder of her husband and was sentenced to 15 years to life. He was paroled in 2004. She was paroled in 2007. Local high school students will go out to Bird Bridge at night, hoping to hear screams from Sandra. They might witness their car doors locking and unlocking. They may experience the feeling of dread or hear her footsteps. There have even been reports of an apparition of a woman along the bridge. Built between 1867 and 1871 in Atchison, Kansas by Michael C. Finney, the Sallie House is named after a young girl who is said to be a ghostly presence at the home. The home reportedly had a doctor's office and surgery suite on the first floor. Sallie, though, was not a resident of the house, but rather a 6-year-old patient who died after a failed appendectomy. Allegedly, the operation began before the anesthesia took place, making her last moments rather traumatic, linking her to this home. In 1993, the home was rented by Tony and Debra Pickman. It wasn't long after they moved in that they experienced strange things. Multiple ghosts are believed to be at the Sallie House. Some have physically attacked Tony, they've set fire in the house, and have moved objects. Investigators claim their equipment will stop working and batteries will completely drain. Visitors have experienced unexplained scratches or bruises, physical touches, and coldness. There are also reports of trained guide dogs refusing to enter the nursery. The house is no longer occupied, but open for scheduled tours. To learn more about the Sallie House, Debra Pickman wrote The Sallie House Haunting, A True Story. The Amazon link is below. When you hear the name Dodge City, what is the first thing you think of? Lawlessness, Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, the Wild West frontier, Gunsmoke, the phrase, get out of Dodge. You would be correct if you thought of any of these. Located in southwest Kansas, Dodge City has a rich history during the Wild West. Dodge, as most Kansans call it, is the home of the Boot Hill Museum. One house that has caused a lot of movement is the Hardesty House. It was constructed in 1879 by Alonzo B. Webster and was named for Colonel Richard Jack Hardesty. Hardesty's wealth came from the mines in Montana and Colorado. Jack married his wife Maggie in 1880 and together had one child, Sallie, in 1883. Richard died in 1910 and the house was sold in 1914. The Gilmore family, who bought the house in 1914, moved the house for the first time to make room for an extension. After 55 years in the house, the Gilmores moved and the house was scheduled for a demolition. The Skelly Oil Company bought the house and donated it to the Boot Hill Museum, thus moving it for a second time to the museum site. In 2002, the house was moved for a third time, just yards from its museum site to make way for a restaurant. Spirits are said to reside here. They will turn on lights after they have been turned off. Visitors will even hear voices. Workers have said that the organ will begin playing by itself and a rocking chair will rock on its own. A picture of Colonel Hardesty could be found on the floor, despite no one hearing it fall. Initially named Camp Scott for General Winfield Scott, it was established on May 30th, 1842. Soldiers from Camp Scott became involved in the conflict known as Bleeding Kansas during the Civil War. Fort Scott served as a supply depot for Union armies, a hospital for soldiers in the region, and a place for those fleeing the war. As the decades passed, some buildings were torn down or destroyed by fire. In the 1950s, residents of the city of Fort Scott argued for the fort to be restored to its original appearance. Due to federal funding, The fort was restored to its 1840s glory. In 1978, it became a National Historic Site and later became a National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom certified site. Apparitions of soldiers and officers are said to linger on the lawn, in the courtyard, in the cell blocks, and in the stables. Visitors have said they have had conversations with these spirits dressed in period clothing and having mistaken them for tour guides. Foggy apparitions have been reported coming out of the chimney. A Free State hotel on the fort was an orphanage, and children can be heard playing and talking. Established on May 8, 1827 by Henry Leavenworth, Fort Leavenworth was the first settlement in the Kansas Territory and is the oldest active Army post west of the Mississippi River. In May 1829, the Kickapoo tribe occupied the fort until it was re-garrisoned in fall of the same year. Soldiers, surveyors, and settlers would often stop on their way west. During the Civil War, Confederate General Sterling Price headed towards Fort Leavenworth, but was stopped in the Battle of Westport, Missouri in 1864. A year later, the Army began engaging with many tribes in the area. This lasted from 1865 to 1891. The tribes wanted to maintain their lands and freedoms, but the government was trying to force them onto reservations. Over 1,000 combat engagements with the Apache, Modoc, Cheyenne, Ute, Nez Perce, Comanche, Kiowa, Kickapoo, and more stretched the fort's resources. Famously, Chief Joseph's Nez Perce tribe was detained at the fort in 1877. In 1881, General William Sherman established the School of Application for Cavalry and Infantry, later becoming the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. Many famous students include George C. Marshall, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, Douglas MacArthur, Colin Powell, and George Patton. The fort still houses soldiers today, including the 35th Infantry Division. Not only is the fort active, but the National Cemetery is still in use. Some of the sightings are from the cemetery as well. The Chief of Staff's quarters still hosts a ghostly tea party. People report hearing the sounds of a tea party, but the parlor is empty. General George Custer continues to reside at the general's residence. He was court-martialed in 1867 for leaving his command and mistreating his troops. He was found guilty and faced a year of suspension, and was reinstated in September 1868. The old disciplinary barracks consist of 12 towers. The guards often report seeing something move inside the towers, even when no one is there. There have been reports of knocking, footsteps, screams, and ghostly apparitions. The barracks were operated from 1875 to 2002. The Rookery is a duplex and is the oldest house on base. Built in 1832, the residence is said to be haunted by several ghosts, making it one of the most haunted places in Kansas. General Custer is among them. The most known ghost is that of a woman with long hair who rushes at people with her fingernails clawing. The National Cemetery is the final resting place for over 45,000 veterans. In 1880, Catherine and Hiram Rice, or Sutter, and their 2 children stopped at the fort on their way to Oregon. Her husband sent the children to collect firewood one day, but they never returned. After days of searching, the children were never found. The Riches stayed at the fort through the winter, hoping the children would return. Catherine spent many hours a day walking through the snow, searching for her children, but would contract pneumonia and later pass. She is one of the few non-veterans buried at the fort. When Hiram returned to Indiana in the spring, he received a message that the children were swept away in the river and rescued by a group of Fox Indians who cared for them until spring, when it was safe to travel again. Catherine is seen searching the fort for her children, wearing a calico dress, a black shawl, carrying a lantern, and calling out for her children. Visitors to the cemetery report being watched, hear footsteps and sticks break. They hear disembodied voices and moaning. Civil War soldiers are seen walking through the cemetery into the nearby woods. In 1916, Ida Day was hired by the Hutchinson Public Library. During World War I, she sent out books to soldiers. She was the library director from 1916 to 1925, when she took a leave of absence to study at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. She married in 1940 and in 1946 returned to the Hutchinson Public Library, where she served as director until 1954. She moved to California on March 1, 1954, and lived there until her death in 1965. Ida is believed to be back at her beloved library, helping with payroll and printing 0 on the timesheets. She also pokes and watches patrons of the library. Could one of the 7 gateways to hell be located in Kansas? Stull, Kansas. Founded in 1857 by Pennsylvania Dutch settlers, it was named Stull after its first and only postmaster, Sylvester Stull. Many churches were established in the 18th and 19th centuries. The United Methodist Zion Church is still in Stull and was renamed the United Methodist Church. A telephone switchboard was added in the late 1890s, and 2 schools were added before 1861, the first only lasting about 5 years, and the other closing in 1962. Students would go to Lecompton for their schooling. Upon construction of the Clinton Reservoir, the loss of farms from eminent domain changed the livelihood of Stull. Some businesses were established in the area, but did not last long, except for the grocery store, which closed in 1955. With no more than 50 people residing in Stull at its maximum population, the current population is of about 20 and is considered unincorporated. The legendary Gateway to Hell can be found in the Stull Cemetery. Of the 20 residents mentioned, allegedly, some are from beyond Earth. The current residents deny any paranormal activity. Stories of witchcraft, ghosts, and supernatural happenings lay claim to calling Stull one of the 7 gateways to hell. It wasn't until 1974 that an article in the University of Kansas newspaper mentioned some strange occurrences and supernatural happenings. The legend mentioned in the article is that of the devil appearing in person 2 times each year, on the night of the spring equinox and Halloween. A stone staircase appears in the graveyard that descends directly to hell. From this staircase, Satan appears and raises the dead. As time has passed, the stories have become more terrifying. Local lore tells of a gravesite with the word witch engraved into the tombstone. The bones in the grave? Well, that would be Satan's child, born from a witch. Another lore tells the tale of satanic and pagan rituals being held inside the old church. There are accounts that the inside of the church would not be wet on a rainy day, even though there was no roof. The church was bulldozed, but reports state that rain does not fall in the space that the church once occupied. Another rumor is that in 1993, Pope John Paul had his flight rerouted around the airspace of the cemetery during his visit to America. All requests to investigate the cemetery have been denied, although the show Supernatural was permitted to film there for their season 5 finale. County police do patrol the area and will arrest people for trespassing in this now gated cemetery. From haunted hotels to haunted cemeteries, this video only scratches the surface of the haunted locations in Kansas. Tell us below if you'd like a part 2 to Haunted Kansas. What locations did we miss this time around? What locations should we focus on for part 2?